So we're going to now turn our attention on page 3 to the ladder of abstraction and the ladder of applicational probability. If you'll look to Leviticus 19 verses 9 through 10, the book of Leviticus, chapter 19, verses 9 and 10. We'll find an example of what we're talking about here. You got it, Greg?
Oh, yeah.
Read it for us, if you will, verse 9 and 10.
Now when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap the very corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest, nor shall you glint the vineyard, nor shall you gather the fallen fruit of the vineyard. You shall leave it for the needy and stranger. I am the Lord your God.
Yeah, so the book of Ruth is all about this passage. We read about Ruth collecting for Naomi as a stranger in the land, and comes, and there's the edges of the field that Boaz, as a covenant keeper, is allowing her and other of the strangers and the poorer class to be able to access. Now, in the concrete specificness of this passage, we would say to ourselves on the ladder of abstraction, oh, this doesn't apply to me because I can't even grow the elephant ears that are in my front yard. I don't have elephant ears, but I like them. Whatever it is, I can't even name the plants that we have in our yard, so I can't think of any right now. They're lilies; they come up on their own. I like those.
Dandelions.
Dandelions. That one too. Okay, so because I don't have a garden, I don't have an orchard, I don't bear fruit in my vicinity, this doesn't apply to me. And what we say instead is that no, we come up the ladder of abstraction in our work of studying the passage and gathering our notes and doing the observation, interpretation, and then headed towards the application of then asking the question, but how would this apply to me? And essentially this is called the heart of God. So what is the heart of God related to this passage of scripture, related to me? How did the first time readers of this text understand its meaning, and how would it have communicated the timeless truth of God about God's character as a result? And so as a result of that, we would say something about our money, is that we don't spend everything that we have, but there's a portion of it that we leave even beyond what's given to the quote unquote temple. I'm still in Hebrew Bible context in my mind, even beyond the generous percentage giving that we give to the temple, that there ought to be some margin that we leave in order to meet the needs of those who are disadvantaged around us, in order to come to a special way of giving, a one-off gift, you might say, or a passion area that you have related to foster care, or it might be related to human trafficking or something like that. So this passage still has application to us as we climb the ladder of abstraction in order to ask the question, what does it reveal about the character of God in this passage? Then we bring it over to the other ladder and ask the question now, related to what's described, what is prescribed for us today? And the answer begins to be something like this. There's a one-to-one application that's clear. There's a probable application of this timeless truth today, and then there's a possible application of this truth today. Now, the way that'll help those of you who are already called and already preaching, if you're not thinking through this grid already, is that when you come to applicational probability, you're able to nuance in ways that are concrete specific, but you're able to qualify it appropriately and still say things that are interesting or that can be prompting. What am I talking about? What I'm talking about is something along these lines. A one-to-one application of this timeless truth is that you would say everybody needs to leave a little margin in their budget in order to be generous to meet specific needs. You can still hear how abstract that is. When you come down into probable applications, you would say, what I am suggesting to you today is that we should be ready with a 10, a 20, or 100 tucked into the edge of our purse or wallet in order to be able to meet a need when the Spirit of God prompts us. A possible application would be to say something like this. It seems to me, here are the qualifiers, it seems to me, now this is not what the scripture says, but a way in which I also think through this grid is in terms of, I think it's appropriate to make an application to time. So I say, in addition to the ways in which I'm thinking through this financially, I'm also thinking in terms of my time. And so as a result of that, I have a neighbor, and her name is, hypothetically, and her name is Jean, and she cares for her mother. And because of the constant care of her mother, Jean doesn't have time to go to Walmart. And so as a result of that, the suggestion is that my wife and I can go and sit with her mother while Jean can just get out of the house for a while and go to Target. And so we give a portion, leave margins within our time. That's a possible application. You hear the qualifications that happen, and it begins to say to people something like there's a one-to-one direct application, i.e., the scripture avoids sexual immorality. Probable. As a result of that, I have practices related to the ways in which I'm forced to travel with my corporate job with other women, that I have certain ways of being with them, and certain ways in which I always include a third in any kind of a supper, dinner time that we have together. That's a probable application the preacher might make in terms of that. A possible application would be to say, because I struggled so badly with sexual immorality in my own past, as a result, I have to include additional boundaries at this season of my life, and also out of adherence to my spouse and their fears and concerns. And so the possible application might include even a further restriction is that I just take the television before I get there and ask the maintenance people at the hotel to remove it. Again, you're not making that for everybody, but you're working through this possible, probable, and necessary application, and it creates more interesting preaching rather than just staying abstract, like be kind, be good, etc.
So just to get a review here, it's, and I'm not quoting it directly, but it would be fair to say that one-to-one, the Bible is saying blank. Probable as a result of that blank, and then qualifier, it seems to me blank.
That's right.
Okay.
Now, additionally, what's helpful then, Cody, is to then, just in your own mind, I didn't include it here, but include improbable applications and impossible applications, because you're actually arguing against what they may have hear other preachers say, communicators say, or interpreters say, or even the world say. And so I think we're helped by also thinking through improbable and impossible applications by saying, now you've heard it said, this would be the work of Jesus, you've heard it said, but I say to you that it goes beyond that. And so
You've heard it said
think
was
through that
improbable
grid
or
as well.
impossible.
Yeah, improbable and impossible.
You've heard it said was improbable or impossible.
I didn't make that connection yet, but what would it be? You've heard
If
it.
Jesus said it, I would say it's impossible, but
Yeah, I don't know what I meant by that. Strike that.
okay.
For the record. I do have a question.
Yes, sir.
So if it is one time, one-to-one, universal truth, then it would be true for the people of that time as well as the people of this time.
That's it. Or people at any time, you didn't say.
Okay. And so if we're going to say it, then we would have to say for all the non-agricultural workers of that time that they would need to give to the poor somehow is what the truth is.
They would have a posture towards giving.
So that would be
The
okay.
And they would do that, for instance, through their hospitality, through their welcoming, through a smile.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's good. All right.
Something that's been going over, this is basically you're talking about the give is to live. I mean, that phrase
Hey.
has been going over my mind for the last.
Well, that's illustrating what we're talking about by making a big idea memorable. To give is to live. You rain that down through the sermon. And when you get home, the spouse asks, "What was the sermon about today?" And she says, "Well, I can't remember the passage, but basic idea was to give is to live." And you're like, "Okay, that was sticky. That helped." A way to model that. So then what we do is after we've worked this process ourselves, made our notes, we then consult things that are commenting on these verses. All right, so exegetical, if you have the skill, then means that essentially you're working at a 401 level. You're working with Greek and Hebrew words over on this side of our bookshelves in the space that we're in. It would be Linsky's. If you can work with Linsky, then, and again, doesn't mean you wouldn't consult Linsky. I've actually found non-Greek readers who are helped by Linsky, but it's just at a different level. Expositional commentaries, that would be represented by these commentaries that are pretty popular called Expositor's Bible Commentary. It's in a set just around the corner. That's pretty good. Homiletical commentaries would be if you get Insight for Living, as I did for years in their little magazines. So again, this is old school, but they would send out these little hard copies of Swindoll's notes on Nehemiah, so how he preached it. In our bookshelves, I think you'll find some Warren Wiersbe B series on all the various New Testament books of the Bible. Historically, you're looking at the preacher's homiletic commentary. And so there'd be Phillips Brooks and the way in which he outlined. And I found those helpful just to kind of get a big overview of how it now begins to move into our world from their world. So you're seeing what other preachers have done when you're into a homiletical commentary that they've written about it from a preacher's perspective. There's other ones over here that I can't go into detail, but one of them is the work that Abe Curavila, and we'll come back to him again. And Abe Curavila's work, he's really applying an overview of the big idea onto the commentary itself. So he's doing this work of his own expositional work from that world, and then pointing us toward the application. So it would be this kind of a hybrid between the two. That Curavila's work, he only did about 3 or 4 volumes so far, but if you can grab a hold of his work, that can be helpful. Devotional, what I mean by that is that you can watch for things that are in anything from the day of discovery. And of course, I'm not thinking through a digital world right now. I have to leave that to you. Substack. Hey, come on, give it up. Way to go, Rod. Came up with one. But you're looking through a Substack and you think, well, that was a devotional thought that I think such and such could really be helpful. Journals can be helpful, but most notably, if you have a favorite theological school and they put out some kind of a publication of such, for me, for example, Dallas Seminaries, then if you watch, they'll have a summary of some of the professors' major works. And so you can just, let me just show you an example. You can just rip out stuff like this. And then if you're, come alongside and say, oh, if I ever wanted to preach on that, that's going to be really helpful. John Coe, Resisting the Temptation of Moral Formation, Spiritual Formation Grounded in the Cross and Justification. So that was good enough to reach out. Here's Abe Curavila. I remember when we did a sermon on this back in the day at Easter, related to who is that man about the guy in the garden who ran naked, Mark says. Like, what was that guy? What was that all about? And
The streaker.
the streaker, yeah. And so Curavila makes a point about that he thinks it's a reference to the resurrection. It's a figurative. He takes it as opposed to a literal person, although he doesn't deny it could be literal. Anyway, ripped that out and we did an Easter service at the time based upon that. Here's Dallas Seminary, how to always make your first love is always love. So it's kind of a homiletical. So if you watch for these kinds of things, now let me talk to you a little bit about filing them. I have to tell this story just because it makes it more interesting, and that really is the only reason, because I didn't know him. I mentioned earlier the H.A. Ironside Award. The person who won it the year before in May was a little known guy. He was Chuck Stanley's son named Andy. And so Andy Stanley had won it the year before, which was a part of the inspiration for me aspiring in August to win it. One time I had a friend who related to him and he said to me, hey, you want to jump in the car and go with me? I'm going to Andy's house. For those of you who don't know, Andy's a well-known mega church type pastor in Atlanta, and his father, Charles Stanley, was as big a deal or bigger back in the day, and filled with controversy for various things over the last several years. But no, I'm not endorsing all that. I'm just saying he was an older classmate. And on this particular occasion, this friend said to me, jump in the car, go into Andy's house. I said, sure. So we're in his apartment. But one thing I got from that was that Andy did something that for those of you who are preachers, if you don't do this already, or like in Elijah's case, if you're just young enough to still apply this and haven't done it already, Andy went to his file folder and he had a hanging file folder with all 66 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, all the way through to Revelation. Then he had 3 files in each. One was illustrations, just like I held up. Another one was his class notes, because we had to go through all 66 books of the Bible. So we always had class notes in all 66 books. So we'd have class notes in another. And then the final one was, what am I missing? Maybe it was illustrations, applications, and then this kind of thing. I don't exactly know. I had it for years. And at some point I didn't become yeah.
Gene's only back in.
Oh, thank you so much. That's exactly the kind of help I need. At some point then, I did something different and I just have a hodgepodge because I wasn't doing it every week. But you need some kind of a way that when you run across something like this frankly, for me, is just called, the title of mine is called Stump Sermons. That means these are things I've already done. These are things that when I get asked to come up with something new, when I go speak somewhere or something that I want to write about, then I can just go find it and say, oh, and it had, or somebody asks me, what about, I'm preaching on the prodigal. I'll be like, oh man, I just read something that I think really had an insight into that. So create a file system by which you can keep up with these. If you're going to talk about digitally filing them, notes, all that, you're going to have to teach this material, which you're welcome to after me in order to get all that done. So 2 thumbs up for all you Logos digital folks.
Ask a question, how you guys do that.
Yeah, are there other ideas?
Yeah, I use Logos Bible software. I usually keep periodically I have like a reminder on my phone to back up that data onto my computer and then onto an external hard drive too.
Right.
But there's a couple different places you can organize things in Logos. And so I do have like a completed sermon thing, but I also have my processes on there, the different documents I always write before I write a sermon. Those are all organized on there and saved. And then,
And Elijah, can you grab like a
Yes.
Substack?
yeah, there's a notes feature to incorporate links and articles as well. And then you can tag them, you can file them under your choice of topics. If you know, as anything, it helps to be more specific. So you can say grace, or you can say, illustrations for very specific,
Right.
whatever it is. But people complain about the notes feature in Logos, and I'm sure they continue to update it regularly. But that's part of why I think it's important to always have some kind of backed up hard drive, because people always update digital things. Maybe the system you were using is going to become obsolete and you're going to have to put it into something else. And so that's part of the reason that I do it digitally and do it through Logos, is because I just started 5 years ago, and so all my stuff is on there already. But
Did you ever take hard copies of something that, I don't know if touch anything anymore, if it's all.
I've done, yeah, well,
all
I'm
digital or not.
I'm super
Yeah.
analog at the same time. I really love analog tools. And so I also have a filing system for my notebooks and
Yeah,
ideas, but a lot of those end up becoming a digital note
right,
somehow.
just scanning it in or.
So, but I keep a paper copy of a lot of those things as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, it typically is like a tag system, a topical kind of organization in there. And there's a backlog availability in Logos too, where you can upload metadata for your whole sermon series. You could have a catalog of 600 sermons and upload them all at the same time. So all your completed work so far, and then and that might take a few days or a week or something. But then it takes 10 minutes to add your most recent thing in and do every single step, very down to the nitty gritty details. So I think it's a great tool, and still I'm figuring out how to incorporate all the different
features of it.
features of it. There's a lot of things to do in there, and it's probably not the perfect system.
Sure.
For those who are,
You got to have a couple, I think.
It's nice
a
to have
couple
it all
ways
in
to
one
file
place,
it.
I realize it.
Yeah.
For those who are interested in logos, just so you know, we have 3 to 5 licenses available, and including one on this computer. So if you ever like to play around and mess with it, you're not familiar. We also have trainings that were done for us that I can put the links on as you're wanting to learn to navigate. Ben, anything to add about your files that you've been doing?
Yeah, I'm definitely not that organized.
We
but,
wish you could.
I just utilize my Google Drive.
Yeah. That's
And so, I'll do a lot of I'll have folders that say, hey, these are resources that I have, or these are some analogies that I found. So I usually pair it with that, or, put links to articles I found. Or I'll use my Kindle, cause I'll do a lot of digital stuff, but then I can just search. But then it's just not a matter of remembering which book said what.
So anything that
Well, I was just gonna say, we normally do, our teaching team, we have a Google Drive folder, and we plan for the whole year. So we have every year 52 weeks is planned. So we know before we get to the next year what the next 52 weeks are gonna be. And so we have all of the series, all of the sermons already in files. And so all throughout the year, like I saw something the other day for something that we're doing in October. And so I literally take a picture of it with my phone and I just upload it to that file for that series coming up in October. And so that's Google Docs, and the Google Drive is a really easy.
beautiful. All right. Well, Zach, the earlier you can get started with a good, way of whether it's hard copy or combination, the better. If indeed, you become a regular preaching pastor. Regardless, I hope you'll do better than I do with, trying to go I know that's in that stack somewhere. I have some, but I wish I had done more. Yes, Julia.
Recently I gave my 14-year-old grandson a birthday card, and he said, I can't read this. It's in cursive. And I thought, good grief, all my years of journaling and all of my notes will be lost to my grandchildren. That's crazy. So yeah, what y'all are doing is really important, even though for me personally, that's part of the learning process. The pen to the paper actually wires that to my brain, and everything I do is written in cursive, and I'm trying to switch to just printing.
There's a lot to be said to that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
we're
you.
getting old, Rod.
I can read cursive, so you can give them.
Give y'all my notebooks.
That's comforting, Elijah. Thank you. It's comforting. All right. Decide on a theological thrust of this pericope. So now we're getting into the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of how we're now moving it towards a sermon. The word theological thrust, what we means by that is we're looking for a way in which we're now coming to something that is the focus, the topic, the complement to this, the assertion that's being made, what gets done in the world as a result. So we begin to decide on a theological, we begin to make some narrowing, it's what I'm trying to say, some focusing. And by the word pericope, if I use it, it simply means that that this book is a pericope, and therefore I can summarize the whole book in a theological thrust. Luke and Acts was probably one book together. Most confidently it was. And so if I grab Luke and Acts, I say, well, there's a theological thrust within Luke and Acts. Now, if I take just the book of Acts, then there's going to be a theological thrust within that book that's going to be nuanced, again, similar, but a little differently than if I take the whole book as a whole. If I only pick what we would call, I don't even want to use the word chapter. I want to use more like the pericope of a chapter, which I didn't want to use, but a segment, a section. Then as a result of that, that's a pericope, but there's also a theological thrust potentially within these 3 verses or these 5 verses. So that's what we mean by a passage or a pericope. And that in each case, we're now driving that down into saying, okay, now in our words, having done as best I can, proper, good, healthy, reasonable hermeneutic, meaning interpretation, I'm now going to state it in a theological thrust. Now, how do we do that? If you'll turn the page to page 4, we do that through a series of questions discerning the heart of God in this passage. Now, just so you're aware, as an example, is that these questions you will find in the front of my Bible. So these are, I can't locate it right off somewhere. There it is. So just right as I'm working with the scriptures, here's the list that's in front of you that's easily accessible to me. So I could just peel it over and go, okay, now, what kind of situation was this selected pericope intended to prevent or promote? What change in society would this be achieved if it were followed? Whose needs of human dignity are upheld? I'm skipping down. In what way does this pericope passage reflect what we know from elsewhere about the character of God and his hopes for human life? So I later talk about at the end in the appendix, and I encourage you maybe over lunch just to flip back to the back if you haven't already and look at the what's there. And one of them is what I call an easy reference. And the easy reference is so that you have something that you'll keep close to your computer. If you lose these notes, don't lose that easy reference, what I'm trying to say, as you're going to prepare for a youth talk. And you're studying a passage, if you're going to prepare for some kind of a message that's biblical, then keep this easy reference ahead of you. And this is one of those core pieces that you will be helped by to just remind yourself, what is this passage getting done? And this set of questions will help you to then begin to narrow what is the theological thrust that needs to get done in this passage. As concrete, specific as possible, go as low as you can, but stay as high as you have to. Did you follow me? Go as low as you can in terms of concrete specificity, but you have to go as high as you have to in order to for it to not become irrelevant or even absurd as a result. Okay. That good? Okay, now, if we think through the London Metropolitan Police Act of 1839, we'll see other examples of what we were just talking about, the work that we are doing, like we did in Leviticus 19. So read that for me, if you would, Bobby, in front of you there, every person.
Every person shall be liable to a penalty who, within the limits of the Metropolitan Police District, shall in any thoroughfare or public place, to the annoyance of the inhabitants or passengers, repair any part of any cart or carriage, except in cases of accident where repair on the spot is necessary.
So what we would say is, well, I don't drive a carriage. This law is not applicable to me. So I love this comparison of how this has to get done in everyday life. The Constitution, as an example, in this case, the London Metropolitan Police Act, still in effect. And yet there's a work that we do in order to get to the heart of those who created it. Does that make sense? So in very simple ways, what is it that this passage is doing? Someone. How does it apply to us today?
Preventing traffic jams.
Preventing traffic jams. We see this in terms of what, like pull your car, if you have an accident, pull off to the side of the road. In some cases, swap numbers, you don't even call the police. Prevent traffic jams is an easy way to say that. So these are other examples. The one I have to turn your attention to would be standing on my foot, because when my wife and I were in London, this literally happened to her. She had a woman say to her as we stepped onto the, what's it called?
Tube.
That tube. And the big idea over the head is mind the gap, right? Across the top. And so anyway, this very distinguished woman in this very crowded tube says to my wife, your ball is on my foot. Your ball is on my foot. And Julie's like, yeah, I'm sorry, what? Your ball is on my foot. And her suitcase was on this woman's foot. She meant, move your bag. Your bag is on my foot. And so again, you're standing on my foot. Okay, well, what's getting done with that is it's not a declaration of a location of a bag or your foot being on a foot. It's describing move your bag off of it. Drunk with wine, there's an original sense in which that's true. A trans-historical sense would be what?
Drunk on any alcohol.
Stay sober-minded.
Yeah.
Good, okay. Trans-historical. A contemporary sense would be alcohol in general. And then the application would be ways in which we are navigate moderation or abstinence in order to not allow the Spirit of God to be able to speak to us with clarity at any moment by not clouding ourselves. This is why anesthesia is a problem. When I go under the knife, as I have done in anesthesia, my prayer and what I ask of others is always to pray that while I'm not aware and quote unquote out of my mind, that my soul will be protected from the schemes of the enemy. My soul and my body are protected from the schemes of the enemy, because it bothers me to not be sober-minded. It becomes a potential access for the work of demonic activity if I'm not. So drunkenness is a big deal, and the misuse of prescription meds is a big deal. All of it is just fodder for potential problems related to our soul and body being tormented. So anyway, I asked for protection.
Just because you sent a movie recommendation earlier, I thought Good Will Hunting. There's a scene where one of the characters is going to court for beating someone up, and he cites a law from the 1700s about self-defense, and he's gotten out of like 4 or 5 different criminal charges based off of citing 100-and-some-year-old laws for specific case examples. So if you wanted to build a whole preaching movie,
there you go,
list, that might make the cut. For
that'd be a good one. Thank you for mentioning that. Good Will Hunting. Army and Navy. Most of you know that nothing related to the Air Force is in any of the original documents, nor is anything related to the Space Force either. But it, again, in a trajectory, back to that word, in a trajectory, it's implied that this would be included, those things that defend appropriately our boundaries. Okay? Everybody good with that? All right, when we get back from lunch, then what we're going to launch into is will you write one complete sentence? You take that theological thrust, and then we'll talk about how to create a theological thrust in what Haddon Robinson and others is known as the big idea, the central truth, the primary idea that you're trying to get across. And we're going to suggest that in our communications that we always need to have one clear thought. Okay? And that clear thought then will build out and about it and around it, but that we're always trying to get one thing done in our communication. That's in a message and a sermon, but it's also true in any kind, applicable in other settings as well.